God for coffee. Morning. Welcome back. Everybody's favorite bumpkin here. If I look a little bit shot out and sketchy right now, that's because Brody the Wonder Mutt, apparently while we were gone, he developed this condition called bladder the size of a ping pong ball. Every 12 minutes last night, he was banging on the bedroom door and saying, "Hey, I need to go out and water the lawn." Great. I love my little flop-eared mutant buddy, but sometimes, God, he's needy. So we made it back from Daytona in one piece. I got to take a second to give you guys a big, big thank you for that, okay? That was one hell of a damn eye-opening experience on many different levels. I mean, I've always watched the Daytona 200 on TV. I've never had the opportunity to check it out live and in color, so to speak. That was a hell of a ride, y'all. Pardon the pun, but yeah, that was fun. You guys that are Discord members, keep tuned for the new channel that's going in over there, because we decided, you know what, this is too damn awesome to keep to ourselves. We are already making plans for Daytona 2026, y'all. That's right. Let's get together. Let's do a weirdos ride out to Daytona to watch the 200. We got a year to plan this, okay? So, let's start throwing some stuff together now, and that way we can kind of work out all the kinks and shit, because, there's going to be things that we're going to have to compromise on, and there's things that we're going to have to work around. We got a year to put it together. Let's make this happen, because it's a hell of a good time. Okay, so since we're back from Daytona and we're back here in the temple, obviously we got Cleetus up on the left here. You remember the other day whenever I was having you guys along for the ride with me, I made mention that it had a little bit of a thunking noise in the drivetrain, from a tight spot in the chain. Well, after another 150 miles on it, that little bit of thunking got to be a whole lot of banging and clanging. We got to do something about that before it gets spendy, like bad spendy. So that's what we're doing today, kids. It's that time. Here we go. Now, I know to a lot of you guys, this may seem like something that's pretty straightforward and simple, and largely it is. But you got to consider, we got some folks here on board with us. They've never done this stuff before, and we're trying to help. We're trying to educate and learn, all right? So we're going to dive into this. But also, I want to throw out a couple of things that you guys might not be aware of that you might want to keep an eye on, just to keep you from having a little bit of a problem later on down the road, and also to maximize your dollar and stretch your mileage on your chain of sprockets whenever you put them in, okay? So, yeah, let's jump into it. All right, starting out on breaking that stuff down, get your bike up where it's upright. If you got a center stand, hey, great, cool, that's going to help you out. If not, you're going to have to jack it up in some manner that's safe and secure. That way you can pull the rear wheel out of here, because, yeah, it's got to come out to get the sprocket out, because, sprocket, big hole in the middle, axle goes through the middle, yeah, holds it all together. We're already past that point, at least in this case. Depending on your particular make and model, you're going to have to take off whatever you got to take off to where you can get down and get access to the front sprocket and the countershaft nut that holds the front sprocket onto the output shaft, okay? Let me pull the shift linkage off of this thing. Let me pull the front cover off real quick. Be right back. All right, gang. I figured I'd get you a little bit of a close-up view of what I was talking about on the chain on this bike, because this is not exactly what you want to hear whenever you're going down the road at 60 mile an hour plus. I got my microphone set up over here, and hopefully it'll pick up the noise that the chain on this thing's making. Just imagine it happening several times in rapid succession. But pay attention to the bottom run of chain right here. See? Kind of loose and floppy, like you'd normally expect. That's more or less a normal amount of slack. But look here. All of our slack goes away. That thing is fiddle string tight. Now listen to whenever I turn it kind of quick. Let me go the other way with it and see if I can get it to do it. Yeah. Listen close. Watch about when this tight spot lands. Pay attention right about here. You can hear that thing getting tight, and you can see how the wheel really doesn't want to roll. And that thing is just stupid tight right there. I mean, that's fiddle string tight. That ain't no good. Because what'll happen is every time that tight spot comes around, it causes that chain to whip. Now, you can see we've got a little bit of slack here on the sprocket carrier in the wheel hub, and that's just from normal play on the rubber blocks in the cush drive. That's to be expected. But whenever you roll it around and you get this in the mix, that thunking gets directed straight through the chassis, through the wheel, through the swing arm, and it sounds absolutely horrible going down the road. Not to mention the fact that it ain't doing your sprockets any favor neither. Now, if you kept running this like this, eventually what's going to happen, you're going to have a big loose spot in the chain. But not only that, you're subject to the chain failing catastrophically. That can lead to breakage, and worse, it can make this chain ball up around the front sprocket up there. And when it does that, guess what? That's whenever you accidentally develop a rapidly forming inspection window in your crankcases that you do not want. Not to mention the safety aspect of it. Not good stuff, y'all. So that's why we're changing it. Okay, something that's worth mentioning here, since we got to deal with it on Cleetus. On bikes that have a hydraulic clutch, a lot of times you got to pull the clutch slave cylinder off to gain access to the front sprocket. In this case, that clutch slave cylinder bolts on as part of the sprocket cover. What I like to do is I'll pull these guys out of here, and forgive me for not having the plastics off of this thing. It's just I got enough room I can get in there and do what I got to do without having to make extra work for myself. Pull the bolts out of here, and then do not, I repeat, do not squeeze the clutch lever whenever you've got the bolts out of here, because you're about a trigger pull and a half away from taking that piston in the clutch slave cylinder and going and making one hell of a mess and making a lot more work for yourself. Not to mention there's a potential that you can actually blow the seal out of it, and that's going to force you to rebuild it whether it needs it or not. Okay, little guy was being a little stubborn coming out, but eventually he saw things my way. Now, here's something you need to do to keep yourself from having a very expensive oopsie moment. Once you get this guy out of here, in this case, I've got a piece of metal hard line that's formed, and it goes down and it bolts to the slave cylinder. Now, a little bit further on up, that metal hard line turns into a piece of rubber hose. Now, you got to be careful not to bend this stuff because, you know, it's steel hard line, and if you bend something enough times, eventually, yeah, it's going to crack, it's going to break. Right there, yeah. You can see that piston trying to creep out on me because I already had to push the thing back in once. Keep in mind, I'm not pulling the clutch lever, and I know that the camera is not at an ideal angle to where you guys can see it, but you see this little thin, shiny stripe right here on the edge of the housing? That's the edge of that piston trying to creep out of there, and that's strictly just from the force of gravity pushing fluid downhill from the master cylinder into the slave cylinder here, but also these have got a kind of a medium-ish type strength spring in it that helps push that piston out to where it can maintain contact with the clutch push rod. Yeah, you can see a little bit more of it now. Things creeping on out there. The good news is it's easy enough. You can push this thing back in with your hands. Just apply slow and gentle pressure to it, and it'll push the fluid back uphill up into the master cylinder. Now, normally what I would do is I would take a small C-clamp and put on here just to where it will bootstrap it and hold it in place. Since I don't have a small C-clamp here, I'm going to use what I got handy. I got a pair of hose clamp pliers here for doing those bastard spring clamps that everybody loves to hate on. But the good thing is they got a lock built into them. That way they'll hold themselves in place. And we thought we were going to put them right there, but we're not because they don't close up quite far enough. So I got to go to plan B. All right, guys, this is the butch option, but it's what I got handy right here, right now. Poly socket set. Yeah, you know what I'm talking about. One thing you need to watch for if you're doing something like this is put a rag on there to where you're not going to scratch up the pretty part, but also do not clamp these things very heavily at all. Light pressure is all you need to hold that piston in place and to keep it from crawling out on you and popping out and compromising the seal. I just hope my vice grips will open far enough. Hashtag not sponsored by the Irwin Tool Company. Okay, Crisis averted. Sorry, gang, I wasn't exactly prepared for that, but this is one of those times where it kind of pays to think on the fly. Use what you got. Use your environment. Now, this is something that I planned on telling y'all before I had to play, vice grip Jenga to hold the piston in place on this thing. Up here, you still got that ticking time bomb of a lever up on the clutch. Now, what happens if you accidentally bump that thing? Well, chances are nothing good's going to happen, all right? Because it's probably going to pop your vice grips off, or since you don't have that slave cylinder bolted in solid, it can let that piston get cockeyed in the bore of that slave cylinder, and that ain't going to be good neither. So we need to take steps to make sure that that doesn't happen. Like I said, use your environment. Use what you got handy. Ubiquitous shop towel on a roll or a roll of paper towels? Yeah. Just take that, squish it just a little, and then cram it up in there like so. Hey, y'all, it ain't got to look pretty. It just got to work. It kind of feels a whole lot like my life mantra. That'll keep you from accidentally bumping that clutch lever and popping that piston out of the clutch slave cylinder. So we're safe there. Let's go on with it. Now, with any power tool usage, make sure you observe the correct safety protocols pertinent to whatever it is you're using, okay? Good grip. Ugh. See all that yak built up in there? That's road funk and way too much chain lube, okay? That's why it pays to take your chain and give it a good bath every now and then. Doesn't have to be anything fancy. You don't have to buy any kind of bougie off-the-shelf chain cleaner, even though I will say Maxima's cleanup does one hell of a good job and it doesn't leave any film behind. Hashtag not sponsored by Maxima. We may be getting into a lot of shit like that. What works totally fine for this is go to dollar store and buy you a sacrificial toilet brush and then bust out the can of WD-40. Spray it down, get it good and wet with the WD-40, kind of scrub it in a little bit, spray it down again, let it sit in there. The WD-40's got enough solvency in there to where it'll penetrate in and it'll help loosen all the gack up and everything, and then you can get it dug out of there. All right, let me get you guys a little closer to where you can see this a little bit better. There we go. All in all, not terrible. I mean, yeah, it's a little funky, but what do you expect? It's 30-odd years worth of chain funk and road grime built up in there. Now, let me point out a couple things here to you real quick. I know this thing's been replaced at least once before because this fold-over tab right here that anchors the countershaft sprocket nut to the countershaft itself, from the factory, they only fold those things over once. Well, that one has made 2 trips. So somebody thought they needed a little bit of extra just in case voodoo on it, and they're probably right. Never hurts. But we got to bend these out before we can start taking our sprocket nut loose here. Now, I will say it's going to make a hell of a lot easier time for you and a whole lot less work if you leave the chain on until you get that front sprocket loose, okay? That way it gives you some leverage and you got something to work against to be able to get that thing off there, because they are tight. They're damn tight. They have to be, because they're doing a whole hell of a lot of work. And by the way, I don't condone this. This is my ugly screwdriver, and it has been demoted to use such as this for stuff where I just really don't give a damn, and it's basically what I have on hand. Don't use your good screwdrivers for doing this. Don't use your carburetor screwdrivers for doing this. In a perfect world, we would all own a punch and chisel set, and you would get the appropriate size cold chisel to where you can gently fold that tab back away from the edge of the nut with light blows from a appropriate size hammer. Now, when you're folding this fold-over tab back away from the flat of the nut, you don't want to pound it totally flat, because you'll probably notice it's got a little bit of a cup shape where it's already, bent up on the lip a little bit. Don't take it any further than that, because that's when they start cracking and you have pieces break off. But also, you're just kind of fighting against yourself at that point. Okay, guys. Slight pause. I had to run to the People's Republic and I had to pick up a socket that fits the countershaft nut on this bike, because I didn't happen to have one here in the temple. Call it lack of preparing on my part, but hey, I'm I'm only human. Now, I will say this. While I was there, I decided I was going to address my lack of foresight. And I picked up a couple of these little bitty bar clamps. They're $2 a piece. But the thing is, they do a dandy job of holding that damn clutch slave cylinder piston in where it's supposed to be and not letting it come out of there. And the cool thing is, you can flip this thing around to the backside here, and you can use these to spread something too, if need be. Now, speaking of the People's Republic, okay, their impact socket sets that they've got, right now they're $28. Usually you can pick these up for a solid 20 whenever you catch them on sale, or if you've got an ITC Club membership. Money well spent. The set of these I've got at the shop, I've had them for 15 years, give or take, and I beat on them on the regular. So let's break in the new kid. Big Bertha never fails me. Okay, at this point, we got to get the rear wheel out of the bike. That way we can get the sprocket carrier out of the wheel and get the sprocket off the carrier. Then we'll worry about cutting the chain off of here. I'm going to kind of skip to that point and everything because taking the wheel off of this bike, it's kind of unique to this bike, and it's a system that most motorcycles don't use. Kawasaki's used it on a few other models, but the eccentric system that they use for adjusting the chain tension and axle alignment on these bikes, it's a little bit unique. Just because you're unique doesn't mean you're user-friendly. All right, guys, check it out. A good, quick, and dirty way to check to see if your chain and sprockets need to be replaced. Whenever you've got your chain tension set to a normal amount of slack, roll it around until you find your loose spot in the chain, and then pull on the chain in line with the swing arm, like you're pulling it directly away from the front sprocket, and watch and see how much of the sprocket teeth are exposed. I know it's a little hard to see right there, and I'm sorry, I'm doing this one-handed here, but you see how far I can lift that link away from the sprocket tooth right there? That's a lot. Basically, the rule of thumb is, if you can pull on the chain and see more than about a millimeter's worth of the valley of that tooth, you got enough slack in the chain and you got enough wear in the chain that it warrants replacing. Now, here's where that comes into play. Let's look further down low on the bottom run of the sprocket here. Now, I'm going to pull on it in the same manner, but watch how the chain shifts on the sprocket teeth. See that? That's because the distance from the pin to the pin, not necessarily the pins here, but the rollers in between on the roller links, you got enough wear there where it's trying to ride up on the sprocket teeth. That's when the chain's reached the end of its usable service life. Okay, gang. Got the sprockets out of this bike, and there's a couple things I wanted to point out to you and just kind of give you a side-by-side comparison between the two. I got the new sprockets laying on top of the old sprockets right now. Now, if you look, I've got the teeth matched up here on this rear sprocket, and we're looking directly down on that. And I know it's a little bit difficult to see, so let me shine a flashlight on there and see if that'll make that pop just a little more. Now you can see we don't have a whole lot of deviation in the tooth profile of that rear sprocket comparing the new to the old. There's a little bit there, but not a whole lot. Let's get close up on it here and we can see what little deviation there is. Yeah, it's got a little bit of wear, but like I said, not a ton. You can see a little bit here where it's, because this is the direction that the chain pulls in. You can see how it's starting to scallop out on this side of the sprocket tooth a little bit. Now, some of y'all may be wondering why these sprocket teeth why these sprockets don't look the same. I elected to go ahead and make a gearing change on this bike when I was replacing the chain and sprockets. The original sprockets on this are a 17-tooth front and a 45-tooth rear. As much mid-range torque as this bike makes and as easily as it cruises, I wanted to bring the cruise RPM down a little bit just for fuel economy reasons and just for ha-has. So what I did is I went to a rear sprocket that's 3 teeth smaller. Now, the reason why I went 3 teeth smaller, it's not just an arbitrary number. The way the split on the gearing works out, for every tooth you change on the front sprocket, it's the equivalent of changing 3 teeth on the rear sprocket. So in this case, I dropped 3 teeth off of this rear sprocket. We went from a 45 to a 42. Now what that's going to do is that's going to make the cruising RPM slightly lower. but it's not going to affect our speedometer in this case because the speedometer on this bike drives off the front wheel. But what we will see is we'll see roughly about a 300 to 350 RPM drop in cruising RPM at a given speed. Will that make it a little slower to accelerate? Some bikes, yes. Here in Cleetus, no, because he's got plenty of power on tap. Backing away from it, I've got the teeth matched up over here on this side. You can see just how much of a difference in the circumference of that sprocket that a 3-tooth change will make. Now, I would have preferred to have gone up 1 tooth on the front sprocket because that will have the same effect, but they didn't have an 18-tooth front sprocket that was readily available. It's something I would have had to have custom ordered. So I stayed with a stock tooth count on the front. Now, I will encourage you, if you are looking to make a gearing change, if you're looking to lower your gear ratio to make the bike accelerate a little quicker, add teeth to the back sprocket. Because whenever you drop teeth on the front sprocket, say if I went from a 17, which was what I have, down to a 16, that chain wraps around the sprocket tighter. So that chain is flexing more every time it comes around. So that's going to just add up to accelerated wear on the chain. It's going to stretch quicker and you're going to have less longevity out of it. If you want to go bigger on the gearing to make it accelerate quicker, add teeth to the back. Your chain will thank you. Now this front sprocket is the eye opener here. Keep in mind I got the new sprocket laid on top here. But if we look at the difference in the tooth profile, the wear is pretty apparent on that. And somebody had done the dirty on this front sprocket. They had removed this thing once upon a time, and they went the cheap route and they flipped it to reverse it. Now granted, if you catch it in enough time to where you can do that, yeah, there's nothing wrong with doing that because it evens out the wear on the sprocket teeth. But look real close. This is the way the sprocket was on the bike. And if you notice back here, we got a real deep scallop on that sprocket tooth. That's from the engine torque forcing that sprocket tooth into the roller on that chain to drag it around every time it comes around. And you see how badly dipped back that is? That was the source of all of our chain wear and all of our poppy, clicky, rough stuff going on with the chain. Because look at the difference in the tooth profile from the new sprocket to the old one. See how much of that chain roller that wasn't being supported by the sprocket tooth? That's going to make a hell of a lot of racket, and believe me, it did. Okay, so we got our rear sprocket in, we got it bolted down, we got the axle put back in, and we got it snugged up. We don't have it torqued all the way yet because we got to move that to adjust our chain. But we got a layer of chain on there. Now keep in mind, I changed the gear ratio on this thing, and I took 3 teeth off the back sprocket. So our stock chain count is no longer relevant as far as how many links are supposed to be in this chain. We're going to have to make it a little bit shorter, but it's not going to lay in there quite exactly the same as it did before. Here's how you figure out how long it needs to be. And forewarning, y'all, it's time for everybody's favorite part. That's right, tucking hands. And just for the sake of the video, I'm going to pull this chain guard out of here. Normally, you wouldn't have to do this. However, it's going to make it easier for you guys to see what I'm doing and see what I'm trying to show you here. That, and also, if you got a whole bunch of chain gack built up in there, this is a good opportunity to pull that sucker off and give it a scrub down. You'll be amazed at how much of that crap collects up in there. Let go. There you go. Yeah. Ew. Granted, it's nowhere near as much as what I've seen on some of them, but still, ew. Speaking of chains, I'm trying out this JT Z3 X-Ring chain. Now, in the past, typically what I've recommended to my customers and what I use at the shop, it's the Parts Unlimited brand O or X-Ring chain, depending on what the application is. And there are some subtle differences between the two. There's not a whole lot of price difference there, though. The X-Ring chains, they do a better job at sealing the lube in around the roller pin and the bushing, and that's where you need it to stay. That way it kind of extends the life of the chain, and also it's not as prone to getting contaminants in it, like if you get caught in the rain or if you ride a lot of dirt, things like that. Now on this chain, if you look close, you can see where we have a bit of a gap in between the side plates here. Now on an O-ring chain, you typically have a thin O-ring that's in between the inner and the outer side plate, and that seals the grease in around the roller pin and the bushing. An X-ring chain, it's not an O-ring. An O-ring is a round cross-section, like, you know, how you see my microphone here. It's just round. So you got one point of contact on each side. An X-ring chain, if you were to take the X-ring and cut it down the side to where you could see the cross-section of it, it looks like a plus sign turned on its side, or an X. So that gives you 2 points of contact per each side. So it gives you more sealing, and it does a better job at keeping the lube in where it needs to be instead of getting flung out of the chain and all over the rear wheel. So starting out with a freshie new out of the box, take it, lay it on the rear sprocket, and just kind of push it forward, guide it into where it needs to go, because you got to get it up there and you got to get it wrapped around the front sprocket and then send it back towards the rear wheel. Now this chain is going to be a little bit stiff and a little bit awkward because it's new. That's to be expected. I mean, stiff and awkward, that sounds kind of like prom night, doesn't it? Wow, I just got the look. We roll that guy on around, and you can see we got some extra chain here. There's a reason for that. This bike normally takes a 110 link chain. I was going to buy a 112 just for some wiggle room, because typically, just to cover my butt and to account for manufacturing variants and also book variants from data that you may get from an aftermarket source, I always order a chain that's got a couple of extra links in there just to be on the safe side. Now, I knew that I was going to be going shorter on this chain because I've changed the gearing on the bike. I got this chain as 120 link because that was what was available to me to get it here quicker. That way we could get it on the bike and get it done. And also for the purposes of making the video to share with you guys. Now, if you look, I've got that chain stretched pretty tight right there, just doing it by hand. Now, the weight of it will make it droop a little bit. What you can do is you can take a pair of needle nose pliers, or you can take a zip tie, and you can loop it through the roller links here and pull that chain together if you need a helping hand to hold it in place for you. For the purposes of what we're doing here, if I force it, I can get that roller link to fall on the sprocket tooth. And you would think that that's where I need to cut my chain, right here. Well, you would be wrong, and you would be calling up bike shops trying to find a half link or another chain. Because if you cut that right there, what will happen, you're cutting it in the middle of a link pair. You always want to have an even number when you count the links in your chain. And by counting the links, I'm not talking about the side plates here. Count the rollers in the chain. That is what's going to give you your true link count, because each roller link has 2 rollers on it. You will always come up with an even number. If you come up with an odd number, you need to go back and count it again because you counted it wrong or you missed something. So I can't cut it right here because I have no way of joining a roller link to an outer plate. So if I were to do that, to get to the next roller link, the chain would be massively too short because I'm going to be right here by where you see me wiggling my thumb. Obviously, we can't do that because we've got the axle shifted as far forward as the adjustment allows on it. So what we have to do, we're going to skip back 1 tooth on the sprocket, and yeah, when you do that, it gets all kind of floppy down here, but we've got enough adjustment room to where we can take up for that. But we know that if we cut it there, we've got a roller link, go into a roller link, we're going to have an even number on our roller count. That's how we know we're cutting the chain in the right spot. Now typically when chains are brand new, if you roll it back just a little bit, it'll hold itself in place. And what I like to do is I'll take the portion that's going to be cut off and fold it back along that top chain run just to get it out of the way, but also it gives me a visual to where I double check myself to make sure that I'm cutting it in the right spot. Now as far as cutting this chain goes, you can cut it with a grinder or a bench grinder, Dremel tool, whatever. And what you can do if you have to use that method to cut it, where you see the heads of these pins are, you've got 4 areas where the head of that pin is staked down, and that flares the end of it out, and that's what locks the pin into the side plate of the chain. What you want to do is take that pin and grind it flush with the outer link plate of the chain. Once you get that ground flush, you can just flex it, wedge a screwdriver behind it, and it'll pop right off. You just cut your chain down to whatever length you needed. Again, count your links and be double damn sure before you commit to something, okay? Because where the heads of these pins are braided over, that is what holds the chain together. If you compromise this by grinding it and then realize, oh shit, I ground it in the wrong spot, that's going to be a weak link in your chain, and that ain't going to do you no favors. Now, I have a dedicated tool for cutting chain and for doing drive chain service. Not only does it cut chain, it also presses side plate link side plates back in place. And my tool will also rivet a rivet type master link if you elect to use a rivet link as opposed to a clip link. There's nothing wrong with the clip link, but a rivet link gives you an extra measure of security, especially on a bigger horsepower bike like this. It's cheap insurance. Now, the way this works is this saddles on top of the pins, and as you tighten this jack screw up, it forces that pin through the side plates of the chain. It's not physically cutting it, it's driving that pin out to where you can remove the unneeded section of chain. Now, this tool I've had for, long damn time. And from a retail standpoint, this is about a $110, $120 tool from RK. Now, does everybody need to spend that kind of money? No, absolutely not. There are aftermarket versions that are a very similar copy of this tool that I have used quite a few times in the past, that other people in the shop have had, things like that. And for the average DIY guy, they're going to hold up perfectly fine. And you can pick one up for about $40, $45 off Amazon, something like that. I'll find you guys a link and I'll put it down in the description in here, okay? So we know that's where we need to cut our chain. Take our chain cutter and set it up right there. The body screw has got to screw all the way down to where it makes full contact, and it's basically pinching both sides of the chain. You don't have to take a wrench and yoink on it to tighten it down or anything, but you want it down snug to where it's not going to wobble around and wobble off center. This guy right here in the end, that's what controls that ram pin that comes out, and that's what actually does the cutting of the chain. Now on this, whenever you're using one of these tools, I know I see a lot of guys do it, and I know you're probably tempted to do it. Do not use an impact gun on this. The shock load from an impact gun will quickly disintegrate your chain tool, and it will kill it dead. And if you're in the middle of a job, that's no good, because now you got a busted tool and you still ain't got where you need to be. Moral of the story is, kids, don't overwork your tool, because nobody likes an overworked tool. Sorry, Mom. It was the only joke I could come up with at the time. You can see initially I had to kind of hoss on that thing a little bit to get it moving, and then it got a whole lot easier to turn. That's because we're pushing that swaged part of the head of that chain pin through the side plates. And now we're just driving it out the other side. And there it is. Now you can see how it cut the chain because I was driving it through from this side. Now if you look closely, you can see where the end of that head of that pin is braided and flared out. Well, this side, not so much anymore, because it physically pushed that through there and it rolled that metal back into a round shape. Now, if you got a chain that's really, really tough, go ahead and take a Dremel tool or something, knock the head off of that thing, it'll push through there like butter. And honestly, 50-50 shot whether or not I should have done it on this one, because it was a little on the snug side. But if you take the time to grind the head off, it will definitely make the life of your tool have more longevity. It'll last longer, if you get my meaning. Well, I was hoping I'd be able to show you guys the cross section of the O-ring and that chain from where we took the links out that we didn't need. Alas, it was not to be. I can't get my camera to zoom in enough and focus good enough to show you guys the detail of it. I'm sorry. But basically, it's like I said, an O-ring, it's round. So you got one point of contact on each side where it presses in between the side plates. With the X-ring chains, it's literally like the letter X or a plus sign that's turned on its side. So you've got 2 points of contact on either side. Plus you've got a little reservoir that traps grease in between the 2 points of contact, and that just gives it an extra layer of protection to keep the elements and water and road funk and squirrels and, small children and things like that from getting sucked into the chain and causing, extreme wear on the chain. Okay, now I'm hoping that the camera will pick this up. Now, what we have here, it's not a conventional master link with the little springy clip that slides in and locks in. See that? What that is that's a rivet link. And if you notice, here on the tips of the pin, it's got a little dimple drilled in there. That's how it brads into place because, again, if you look closely, you can see how just the tip is a little bit smaller than the main body of that pin. That's to allow that side plate to start on straight, and then this gets pressed together to a depth that will be predetermined by the tool that's used to press it in place. It only lets it press in so far and then it stops. And then you come back behind it with a flaring tool, and it supports the pin on this side, and basically it drives a taper pin in this side to flare the head of that pin out to lock the link into place, thus turning it into a endless chain. Now this is kind of the ooky part, okay, but y'all are just going to have to bear with it and roll on and push through. Get your new chain. It's going to have 4 new O-rings in there. It's going to have that little bitty grease packet in there. This stuff is thick. I'm talking like 3-year-old Sam's Club peanut butter thick. But you need to squeeze a little bit of this stuff out onto the pins on your master link, then smear it around to where you've got a good coating of it. Try not to get this stuff into the little divots in the head of that pin, because whenever you go, if you've got grease built up in there, whenever you go to flare the head of that pin out, it will actually pop. It's how a diesel engine starts and runs. There's so much pressure being put on there that occasionally that can cause a very tiny little explosion. And when it does that, a lot of times it'll chip the end of that pin off and it'll compromise the integrity of that master link pin. Yeah, don't do it. It's cool, don't get me wrong, just don't do it. So we got our master link pins greased up good. We're going to take 2 of our O-rings, or in this case X-rings, and we're going to smear some grease on them, slip them down into place. That little blob that builds up on this side of the O-ring or the X-ring, go ahead and leave that there, because there's always time for lubricant. But go ahead, get a good even coat on there. Take that sucker and flip it around. That way you can make sure that you got plenty of lubrication on the face of that O-ring where it's getting mashed against the side plate. Realistically, that's the majority of all the lube that this thing is going to get throughout its entire lifetime. Like aerosol-based spray-on lubes, they're not going to penetrate past these X-rings and get down to the pin and the pin bushing of the chain link itself. If it's got enough slop in it that stuff can get in there, chains will wear out. The grease that you're putting in here right now, that grease is going to be there forever, and that's all it's going to get. I like to take that and push that through there, work it back and forth a little bit, and then I'll pull it back out and reapply a little bit more just for good measure. Any excess that gets squeezed out, you can just wipe it off, or the bike will get rid of it as you're going down the road for the first 100 miles or so. You want to give it the best opportunity that you can for a long and healthy life. So we're going to slide that sucker home there. And then take your other 2 O-rings, smear goop all over them. That way they've got lubrication. By this time, you probably don't have a whole lot of grease left in that grease packet, but you got just enough to where you can put a little dab on the face of that roller link where each one of these O-rings is going to go. Go ahead and do that, just to where you've got a good film built up there, and you're not going to starve it for lubrication as the bike's being ridden. Because like I said, this is virtually all the lubricant that these O-rings are ever going to see from the inside. Yeah, it's sticky. It's kind of like that wayward gym sock you find underneath a teenager's bed whenever you go in there looking for something in their room. Yeah, don't put a whole lot of thought into that. You won't like the mental image. So again, we're going to take it, stick it on there, spin it around, smear it around, get her good and lubed up, because we're fixing to embark on a journey that nobody's ever done that to me before. Okay, this should probably go without saying, but whenever you're putting that side plate on your master link, if you've got numbers or a logo or something like that stamped in it like this one does, make sure that faces away from the O-rings, because that little bit of an edge right there, if it's up against the O-ring, guess what? Eventually, it's going to beat it up, tear it up. There's your weakest link. Now, you remember that little starting spot that was on the lead end of the pins on this chain? You can set that link up there and just kind of squeeze it in place with your thumbs, and that'll hold it in place while you're getting your tool rigged up to where you can actually press it to the correct depth, and then also flare the heads out on those chain pins to get it locked in place. So for that, we're going to reconfigure our tool just a wee bit. There's minor variances based on the manufacturer of it, but most of these tools work in a similar fashion. Okay, now pressing this side plate on, it's kind of a two-step process. Regardless of what brand or type of chain press you buy, it's going to have two plates in there that's going to look like this. Now that little trough in there, one of them, it's going to be shallower than the other one. The shallow one is the one that you want for a rivet link type chain like this, because you don't have as much of that pin protruding out. The deeper one is for a conventional clip link style, because it's got more of the head of the pin poking out to be able to put that little spring clip underneath it. But you just take that, make sure that that groove in that press plate is centered up over where the head of the pin is going to come out, because that new pin's got to have some place to go, y'all. And then take a wrench and crank her on down. That thing is exceptionally tight. Why is it doing that? That's why it's doing that, because I am slightly crooked and I'm getting myself bound up. There we go. Remember, guys, I'll always show you my screw-ups. That way you don't do my dumps. My dumbs are my dumbs. You do your dumps. Oh, that's going on so much better. Even though it's going on better, it's still pretty tight. And that's normal, because that's the way these things are designed. It's a press fit. Now, usually when you're pressing these things on, after you get it moving, you'll feel it kind of limber up a little bit, and then it'll get tight again. That's when you know you're bottomed out. Stop there. Don't try to crank on it anymore, or you're just going to break your tool. Remember, always protect your tool. Okay, so you can see right there, we got our side plate pressed on, it's pressed in place. And you can see we don't have a whole lot of protrusion on that pin. But the thing is, that's all we need for bradding that thing out. Now we're going to take a pick, and we're going to get that excess lube out of the cavity in the heads of those pins, because we don't want it to diesel and pop, because it's actually pretty vigorous when it does that, and I've had little bits and pieces of those things blow out of there and actually bury up in me and draw blood. Not a good time. 0 to 5 stars. Don't recommend. Not to mention it wrecks your friggin' master link and you got to cut it out of there and start all over again. Okay, from this point to where we can rivet the head on the master link and call it a done deal in a true endless chain, you're going to have two pieces in your chain kit that go in your chain press. One side is going to have a little dimple in it, and that just, the head of the pin that you're riveting will sit in here, and it supports it, and it keeps it centered up. And the other one, it's kind of hard to see, but see how it's got that little cone-shaped bump on there? That's what flares out the head of that pin and swedges it out to lock the side plate in place. Now keep in mind, if you guys bought a brand-ass new chain tool for doing something like this, it's a good idea to take it apart, put a thin smear of grease on the threads on that thing, and work it back and through to get that grease in there. You'd be amazed at how much easier it makes for this thing to work, and also how much easier it is for you guys to twist on the wrench to get it to do what you need it to do. Not only that, but it'll make it last a whole hell of a lot longer too, because it's going to significantly reduce the chance of the threads on the push bolt or the cutter bolt galling into the body of the tool. So we just take it, let that dimple on the backer, find the head of the pin, and then screw that down by hand until the taper for the flaring pin is in the dimple on the master link pin. And then just crank it in until it gets good and snug. And there, we stop. Now I'm going to bring you guys back in here to where I can show you the differences on this. See? This one has not been done yet. That's the one that I just flared out. Focus. Focus. Now, the camera makes that pin look a whole lot bigger than what it really is. In all actuality, it's only flaring the head of this thing out about half a millimeter, give or take. But the way that taper pin goes in there to spread this out, what's a polite way to say this? Teenage years, ready to settle down years. Y'all know what I mean. Okay, so we got our chain back together. We got the master link pressed back in place. Everything's riveted in. We kind of roundabout got our chain tension set, but wait, there's something missing. We got to torque the front sprocket nut back on this thing, okay? I've got the luxury of having air here in the temple, okay? And I know a lot of you guys out there are probably saying, well, wait a minute, I ain't got one of those ugga-dugga wrenches. Well, here's how you get around that. Now, this works for taking the sprocket nut off, also putting it back on. Get a big stick. Chunk of 2x4. This is 2x2. It'll work just the same, okay? Y'all remember Hacksaw Jim Duggan, don't you? Oh! Anyway, take your stick. If you're worried about it, wrap a shop towel around it, something like that, so you don't damage the finish on your wheels or on your swing arm. And then have your drive chain kind of sort of in the ballpark, but not totally tightened up where you want it yet. Take this guy, pass it through the wheel, under the swing arm, trapping one of the spokes of the wheel between the stick and the swing arm. This is a calibrated stick, just so you know. So then we're going to take our 1995 torque wrench from the People's Republic of Harbor Freight, and we're going to dial this thing up to our torque spec on this sprocket nut, which in this case is 95 foot-pounds. And 90, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, right there. Yep, right there. Obviously, we're going to make sure it's going the right direction. Now, while your stick is holding the wheel for you, now you can torque your sprocket nut. Yeah! And I didn't even have to break out the cheater pipe on that one. Through a cruel twist of fate and the genetic lottery, I am afflicted with a congenital condition called beeswax. This is a phrase that you'll not find in any medical dictionary or journal anywhere on the planet. This is a phrase that my wife so uncaringly coined shortly after we began our co-journey around this little, mud ball called Earth way back when. And basically what that stands for is back with a crack syndrome, i.e., I'm a big dude, but I got no ass. There you go. Thanks, babe. Remember, don't leave your torque wrench dialed up. Once you get done with it, dial that sucker down so you don't stretch the spring in there and it end up throwing it out of calibration. I know it's only $20 at Harbor Freight. I know it's got a lifetime warranty, but hey, practice makes perfect, y'all. Am I perfect? Hell no, but I'm going to practice at it. Okay, so now we can remove said tactical stick. Okay, so we got our sprocket nut tightened up. We're pretty much done there. All we got to do is address that little fold-over tab. That way it locks the sprocket nut in place. In real world, that little fold-over tab, that ain't what's holding it in there, okay? The fact that it's tight, that's what's holding it in there. That fold-over tab, that's just a Hail Mary feel-good instrument. The easy way to do these is to take a cold chisel and set it back there behind where that lip is. Now, I know this is not a cold chisel, but this is my designated ugly screwdriver, so I am totally fine using it for this purpose. Bend it down, but don't try to hammer it all the way down on the flat of the nut. You're just wanting to bend those things out there to where you can get a hold of them. And then come in behind it with a pair of channel locks and gently squeeze it down flat against the nut. Because if you try to hammer that thing down in place with a chisel, what's going to happen is it's going to thin it out, and you're probably accidentally going to chisel a little chunk of it off, and then you don't have any fold-over tab anymore. You've got a Bluetooth fold-over tab, and Bluetooth don't work here very good. So there, we're done. Now all we got to do is just set the chain slack on this thing and button it up and put it back down on the ground, and we can call it good. Now, whenever you're doing a new set of chain and sprockets, let's go over a couple things here. Before you just slap a chain on one and call it good, take a good hard look at your sprockets, because remember what I was showing you, especially with the wear on the front sprocket. Somebody had already flipped that thing around to try to get a little bit more longevity out of it. And there's nothing wrong with doing that as long as you don't let it run too long before you flip it. Whenever the teeth of the sprocket start getting that hook shape to them, they're too far gone. Also, on this bike, you can't flip the rear sprocket over because the sprocket has a slight offset machined into it where it bolts up to the sprocket carrier. So you're stuck with that. Now, chain and sprockets will typically wear together as a mated assembly. It's almost kind of like piston rings seating into a cylinder on a motor. Now, that being said, it's kind of a false economy to try to go dirt dog cheap and just throw a new chain on some old sprockets for the most part. Now, there's certain times, yeah, you can get away with it, but you need to take a good hard look at your sprockets first and see how much wear is there, and then be honest with yourself, because that can be the difference between getting 6,000 to 7,000 miles out of a chain or getting 20,000 miles out of a chain. Now, realistically, with proper care and feeding, a good quality chain and sprocket set, steel sprockets, mind you, not the junky-ass aluminum rear sprockets that Vortex and all the other Speed Racer Go Fast companies sell. Don't even think about running an aluminum rear sprocket on the street, because all you're going to do, you're going to blast through the chain real fast. They wear like butter, and all you're doing is you're just wasting money. If you want something that's going to last and hold up, find something that's steel. Now, on a race bike, that's another story. You're in a whole totally different environment there. For something that you want to live on the street, steel's where it's at, y'all. Now, as far as chain and sprocket brands, I'm not real picky. Now, y'all know me. I tend to kind of look at the budget aspect of things. And what I used on Cleetus here, it's run-of-the-mill generic JT sprockets, front and rear. Got those from Western Power Sports. This chain is that JT, it's the new JT X-Ring chain that they have out. I've not used it before, but I have seen some good stuff about it. And from a price point, it's actually a little bit cheaper than my normal go-to, which is the Parts Unlimited house brand chain. Fun factoid here, I know for absolute fact the Parts Unlimited branded O and X-Ring chains, those are made under contract by EK for Parts Unlimited. It's good stuff. You're literally buying a traditional EK O or X-Ring chain in a different package at a significantly reduced price. It's kind of like the difference between buying, $3 a box mac and cheese and 50-cent a box mac and cheese. At the end of the day, it's mac and cheese, y'all. I personally have never run the JT chain before, but I'm figuring what the hell. We'll give it a try, see how it plays out. If it works, cool, I'll let you know. If it's crap, cool, I'll let you know. But I'd rather me be the guinea pig for it than try to suggest it to one of my customers and then them come back unhappy after they get 5,000 to 6,000 miles into this thing and it's just shot out and stretched out and totally to the point of failure. Now, just to kind of wrap this up as far as chain goes and whatnot, whenever I'm installing a new chain and sprocket set on a bike, obviously you need to roll the chain around because all chains, even brand new out of the box, they will have a tight spot in them. That's where you want to set your slack at. But what I do is I kind of take it a step further. I'll intentionally slightly over tension the chain a little bit to where it's put under tension, and I'll roll the tire around, 15, 20 times. What that does, at least in my brain, it makes sense to me. What that does is that lets the chain links relax, and if they've got a little bit more grease in this link versus this link, it lets it kind of even out. That way you can set your chain slack more accurately. Also, on a brand new chain, especially a sealed chain like these, I will typically set my chain tension just a slight bit tighter than normal, because the chain is going to slacken up pretty significantly, you know, the first couple 300 miles of its initial use, because number one, it's going to fling out excess grease. There's nothing you can do about that, kids. It's going to make a mess. You're going to have tire buggers. Number two, that's where that chain is initially wearing into the tooth profile on the sprockets, and also the roller pins are wearing into the roller pin bushes on the roller links of the chain. So you're always going to have a little bit of growth there. So I will tend to slightly over tension the chain when I initially set them up like that to accommodate for that. Just for example, say the chain requires 1.5 inches worth of free slack. Normally I'll set that to about 1.25 inches worth of free slack. It's not a significant amount, but it will make a big difference on how the chain breaks in, and also how evenly the chain wears in on the sprocket teeth, because say you set it to factory specifications, that first couple of 100 miles go by, that chain's going to be loose and floppy. I mean, it's going to be like something that needs a prescription for a little blue pill, loose and floppy. We don't want that, because that causes chain whip, that causes chain snatch, you know, whenever you're rolling on and off the throttle. And it's generally that much rougher on a brand new chain. So let's try to avoid that, guys. Give it just a smidge bit more, things work out a whole hell of a lot better in the long run. Okay, gang, slight sidebar here since we're kind of coming to the end of this thing. The trip to Daytona, that was awesome. That was a eye-opening experience for me, and I mean, for everybody that helped make that possible, thank you. I have no words, but thank you. I hope you enjoyed the live stream, and you guys on Patreon that were on board with us on that, look for that video coming out as an exclusive for Patreon members here very shortly. We're working on it as we speak. We got a lot we got to go through on that thing, so please bear with us. It's coming. We squeezed this Daytona trip in kind of off the cuff and, you know, spur of the moment for the most part. Something that was already in the works that had been planned for a long time coming. That's the Weirdos camp out at Forgotten Angels. That's right. As of this video's premiere, that's going to be this coming weekend. Thursday, Friday, and Saturday, okay? If you've been living under a rock and you don't know what Forgotten Angels is, go check them out over on their website, okay? It's ForgottenAngelsFlorida.org, and basically in a nutshell, what they do at Forgotten Angels is they take in young men and women that have aged out of the foster care system, that have basically been left homeless by their alleged foster parents or guardians, whatever you want to call them. Ain't a whole lot of parenting going on there. And the thing is, once they turn 18 years old, they're a legal adult. And guess what? The coin purse gets closed and they get pushed out the door with, you know, pretty much everything that they own to their name in the entire world in a plastic trash bag that they got handed to them. And they're told, well, good luck. And that's it. They're left to their own devices. What Forgotten Angels does is they take these young men and women in and they help teach these guys life skills. Some of these folks that come out to Forgotten Angels, they do not have a high school diploma. They don't have a GED. They're currently still in school and they don't have anywhere to go. Some of the clients that come out to Forgotten Angels are so far behind on an academic level that they have a hard time reading or even writing their own name. And we're talking people that in the eyes of the state are a legal adult because they're 18 years old. Now, where David and Cindy step in over at Forgotten Angels, they teach these individuals basic life skills. They teach them how to manage money. They start up a checking account for them. They help facilitate getting to doctor's appointments, legal appointments, school, GED appointments, whatever the case may be. They are there to help these folks turn themselves into a functioning member of society and not be another statistic that's been left homeless by the foster care system. It's a good mission. They're good people, and they do a hell of a job. Take a few minutes, go over and check them out, see what they're all about. Now, the reason I'm bringing this up is because we have the Weirdos camp out this weekend. And, oh, yeah, you can bet your ass we're going to be out there. Me, the wife unit, shade tree surgeon, and God knows how many other people is going to be out there because all the all the weirdos pop out of the woodwork this time of the year, okay? So if you guys are coming to the camp out, hell yeah, Just remember, there is a speed limit on Little Stearns Road, so keep the cranking of the hog, as it were, to a minimum. We don't want to make the neighbors mad, okay, y'all? But if you come to the camp out, look for me. I'll be there. I'll give you a hug. I'll buy you a beer. Let's sit down, kick some tires, shoot the shit, tell some lies, and give everybody a good reason to get together and have a good time to support a good cause, okay? Well, this video has run kind of long, and I've taken a seemingly simple and mundane task and made it overtly complex and, kind of lengthy. However, I hope I was able to give you guys a couple of pointers to avoid some common pitfalls that I see all the time on the regular, and also how to maximize your dollar spent versus your return on investment, so to speak, into getting the parts that you need to get you something that's going to last you a good long while, and also being able to maintain it to keep it working for you for a good long while, okay? If you like what we do here, and you're kind of interested in more, or you kind of wonder what goes on behind the scenes, check out that link down at the bottom of the description here that takes you to the Patreon page. I'm going to tell you guys right now, you ain't got to spend one plug nickel to join my Patreon, okay? We have free membership options available, always have, always will. Now, there are a few perks that some of the contributing members to the Patreon are privy to, and that is exclusive to them because they are the ones that have elected to step up, get behind the cause of what we do here at JTMJ, and help us push forward with projects like Cleetus here, the ZL900 Eliminator, also a upcoming project that nobody knows about yet, but it's going to be my brand of weird. The Patreon page is how you gain access to the Joe the Mountain Jedi Discord server, okay? We're growing one hell of a brain trust over there. We got more people joining every day. We're pooling our knowledge. We're putting all the people that are smarticles and have experience in one little spot. That way we have that resource to tap into whenever a member has a problem or if a member is struggling with something. There's always going to be somebody to help you out on that. Full disclosure here with this video, Corn Pop, you were part of the inspiration for this because I know you just got done fighting this battle with your 400 Ninja as far as your chain and sprockets go. Pay attention to the stick trick, brother. That helps. I got to get my button gear. I got stuff I got to do, and then I still got to go back to work at the ride factory tomorrow, and we got to gear up for it and do it all again. So until then, I love you. I appreciate you coming out, and I'll catch you on the flip side, okay?
Force will be with you, always.